First, let me introduce to you our topic. Our topic is curricular reforms in teacher education. So, we need to know this because we are preparing as future educators. Under this is outcome-based education for teacher preparation curriculum. So, what is OBE? Outcome-based education for teacher preparation curriculum. OBE is one of the fundamental philosophy in higher education in the Philippines lately. All curricula, including teacher education, will be anchored in the concept of OBE. In terms of course design, instructional planning, teaching and assessing students learned, OBE is an educational method that focuses on what the students can actually do after they taught. So, now we are going to discuss the OBE. I will give you the learning outcome first for this topic. Learning outcomes. First, define what outcome-based education as this apply to teacher education. Second, analyze the 4 principles in outcome-based education. Third, describe how teaching and learning relate to OBE. Fourth, explain how the achieved learning outcomes will be assessed. And last, summarize the prospective teacher's role and responsibility in the implementation of outcome-based education. So, there is no advocate for this outcome-based education, and he is Dr. William Spady, leading definer, advocate teacher, and implementer of this successful learner's paradigm. According to Dr. William Spady, 1994, he defined OBE as a early focusing and organizing everything in the educational system around. The essential for all the students to do successfully at the end of their learning experiences. It starts with a clear picture of what is important for the students to be able to do. Then, organizing the curriculum, instruction, and assessment to make sure that learning happens. The OBE is preparing students in life, simply preparing in college or employment. So, mga knowledge and skills nila ay matutunan at magagamit nila at mai-apply sa mga life situations. So, this definition clearly points to the desired results of education, which are learning outcomes. These are made of knowledge, understanding, skills, and attitudes that students should acquire to make them reach their full potential and lead fulfilling lives individuals in the community and at work. So, as we notice in making lesson plan, there's a cognitive and affective psychomotor domain that could measure students' achievement. So, dito sa OBE, dapat laging na-align yung teaching method and assessment sa learning outcome. To define and clarify further, answer to be the following questions should be addressed by the teacher. First, what do we want these students to learn? Why do we want students to learn these things? How can we best help students to learn these things? And how will you know when the students have learned? What, why, how, and how are the main questions that we need to answer or address for the teachers to make a clear objective. So, Spady permits that outcome-based education, all students can learn and succeed, but not all the same time in the same way. Successful learning promotes even more successful learning. School and teachers control the conditions that will determine if the students are successfully in school learning. There are 4 essential principles in OBE. In order to comply with this premise, 4 principles should be followed in their planning, instruction, teaching, and assessing learning. Principle number 1, clarity of focus. A clear focus on what the teachers want to learn is primary principle in OBE. Teachers should bear in mind that the outcome of teaching is learning. To achieve this, teachers and students should have clear picture in mind of what knowledge and skills values must be achieved at the end of the teaching learning process. This is like looking at a straight ahead so that the target will be reached. So at the very beginning of the lesson, you should know the direction of the discussion, where we can figure out in the intended learning outcomes. Dapat alam na natin yung goal at hindi na tayo mangangapa kung ano ang dapat matutunan ng mga estudyante. Kumbaga, naka-picture out na sa ating isipan kung ano ang gusto nating maituro sa mga estudyante. So, principle number 2, design backwards. This principle related to the first. At the beginning of the curriculum design, the learning outcome has clearly defined. What to achieve at the end of the formal schooling is determined as the beginning. Decisions are always traced back desired results. This means that planning, implementing, and assessing should be connected to outcomes. Here, the desired learning outcomes should always connected to the activities of the students. So in the discussion of the lesson, learning outcomes can happen. Whatever you designing lessons, you should have your goal or objectives in mind that should be your basis on trying to deliver your curriculum. So, third principle is the high expectations. Establishing high expectations, challenging standards of performance will encourage students to learn better. This link to premise that successful learning promotes more successful learning as mentioned by Spady in 1994. This is parallel to Thorndike's law of effect, which says that successful reinforces learning, motivates, builds confidence, and encourages learners to do better. So dito, for example, ay yung mga standards ay isang rubrics for the activities. So kapag nabasa nila yon, magre-rely na sila doon sa standards na yon. So minsan maaari nilang mahigitan or mag-exceed sila sa ating expectations based on those dun sa standards. Ganun din sa mga examinations. Kunyari, ang passing grade dapat out of 100 items is 85. So they will be assessed with high standards so they can perform to their full potential of learning. Alam nila yung kung ano yung kailangan nilang gawin para ma-achieve yung ganong score. So magre-review sila para maka-attain ng or ma-reach yung 100 items if they can do it better. So, let's move forward to the principle number 4. Expanded opportunities in OBE. So, OBE, all students are expected to excel, hence equal expanded opportunities should be provided. As advocates of multiple intelligence say, every child has genius in himself, hence is capable of doing the best. Learners develop inborn potential if corresponding opportunities and support are given to nurture. This principle is based on the idea that not all learners can be learned at the same thing at the same way, in the same time. Teaching, learning in outcome-based education. Teaching is teaching if learners learned. Hindi mo masasabi na kapag turo ka na kung hindi naman natuto ang iyong mga estudyante. Learning is measured by its outcome. Whatever approach to teaching is used, the intent should focus on learning rather than on teaching. Subjects do not exist in isolation, but links between them should be made. It is important that subjects learn how to learn, hence teachers should be innovative. So let's move forward on how then should teaching learning be done in OBE. Here are some tips. Tip number 1. Teacher must prepare students adequately. This can be done if the teachers know that they want the students to learn and what learning outcomes to be achieved. Prerequisite knowledge is important. Thus, a review is necessary at the start of the lesson. That is why we have pretest or recap in our lesson plan. Tip number 2. Teacher must create a positive learning environment. Students should feel that regardless of individual uniqueness, the teacher is always there to help. The teacher and student's relationship is very important. The classroom atmosphere should be provided respect for diverse kind of learners. Tip number 3. Teacher must help their students to understand what they have learned and why they should learn it. And how will they know that they have learned? Next is tip number 4. Teacher must use a variety of teaching methods. The most appropriate strategy should be used taking into account the learning outcome teachers want the students to achieve. Also, consider are the contents and characteristics of students, the resources available, and teaching skills of the teacher. Even OBE is learner-centered, sometimes more direct, time-based methods of teaching will be appropriate. Next is tip number 5. Teacher must provide students with enough appropriate to use the knowledge and skills that they gain. When students do this, they can explore with new learning, correct errors, and adjust their thinking. Application of learning is encouraged rather than mere accumulation of this. Last, teacher must help students to bring each learning to a personal closure that will make them aware of what they have learned. Here are additional key points of OBE which shows the shift from traditional to outcome-based education. So, makikita natin dyan sa table yung kanilang difference. So, in traditional, it is a teacher-centered and their focus is to transmit knowledge, understanding of ideas, and values to students. Assessment is on how the students have received knowledge, and the same curriculum is passed from generation to generation. While in the OBE, it is a student-centered that focus on the teaching and learning activities that require students to demonstrate how they achieve the intended learning outcome. This curriculum focuses on according to the needs of the students today. Let's move forward to another topic, which is assessment of learning outcomes in OBE. Assessment of learning outcomes in OBE. Assessment in outcome-based education should also be guided by the 4 principles of OBE, which are clarity of focus, designing backwards, high expectations, and expanded opportunity. It should contribute to the objective of improving students' learning. Since OBE, there is a need first to establish a clear vision of what the students are expected to learn. The assessment becomes an embedded part of the system. To be successful in OBE system, assessment should be guided by the following principles. First, assessment procedure should be valid. Procedure and tools should actually assess what one's intended to test. Next, assessment procedure should be reliable. The result should be consistent. Next, assessment procedure should be fair. Cultural background and other factors should not influence assessment procedure. Next, assessment should be reflect the knowledge and skills that are important to the students. Next, assessment should tell both the teachers and students how students are progressing. Next, assessment should support every student's opportunity to learn. Things are important. Next, assessment should allow individuality or uniqueness to be demonstrated. And lastly, assessment should be comprehensive to cover a wide range of learning outcomes. So let's move forward on learners' responsibility for learning. In outcome-based education, students are responsible for their own learning progress. Nobody can learn for the learner. It is the learner himself or herself who can driven himself or herself to learn. Thus, learning is a personal matter. Teacher can only facilitate that learning, define learning outcomes to be achieved, and assist the students to achieve those outcomes. Students have bigger responsibility to achieve those outcomes. In this way, they will be able to know whether they are learning or not. One of the great benefits of outcome-based education is that it makes students aware of what they should be learning, why they are learning it, why they are actually learning, and why they should do when they are learning. All of this will conclude with achieved learning outcomes. In terms of students' perspective, there are common questions that will guide them as they learned under the OBE curriculum framework. To guide the students in OBE learning, they should ask themselves the following question. As students, what do I have to learn? Why do I have to learn it? What I will be doing while I am learning? How I will know that I am learning? Why I should be learning? Will I have any say in what I learned? How I will be assessed? Let's move forward on the take action. Find OBE in the classroom. Here is the activity. Number 1. Seek permission from the teacher to observe the class for one complete teaching lesson. Number 2. Borrow the teacher's lesson plan. Identify the intended learning outcomes at the beginning of the lesson. Record observation. Number 3. Observe the class activities with the guidance of the teacher. Record your observation. Number 4. Observe if the intended learning outcome at the beginning was achieved at the end of the lesson. Record the observation. Number 5. Summarize all record observation in the matrix below. Use all example as your guide. Write down your report in the proper cell. I observed Science 3 class Quarter 2, Module 1, Human Sense Organs. According to the teacher, I asked permission to observe. There is no daily lesson plan because of today's situation of classes. Instead, it is a weekly lesson plan that was provided to the students through modules, and the discussion is through messenger room. If someone's students unable to attend the discussion, they are called by the teacher to reach them. And here is my table matrix of summary of my observations. At the first column of the table, intended learning outcome of the lesson. And the second, activities to accomplish the intended learning outcome. And in the third column, achieve learning outcome at the end of the lesson. So, the intended learning outcome of the lesson, first is the describe the parts of and function of the sense organs of the human body. So, the activities that I observe are the students look on the module in which sense organs, images, and function is shown. They need to listen to the teacher discussion through messenger room. After discussion, teacher called students to look on the activities needs to answer in the module, and they are answering it orally by the students as their recitation and other activities are set in the module. And the achieved learning outcomes at the end of the lesson are learners describe the parts and function of the sense organs of human body. The second intended learning outcome is practice healthy habits in taking care of the sense organs. The observation I recorded is the teacher read the dialogue about healthy habits in taking care of the organs. After they listen, they are given the time to answer the practice activities about what they have learned. And in the end of the module, there is an assessment for them to measure if they understand the module. They need to pass the module on the given date of submission. So, the achieved learning outcome at the end of the lesson is practice healthy habits in taking care of the sense organs. Based on the observation I had been recorded, even this kind of situation of the students learning, teachers are implementing the curriculum with their fullest extent to learn the students and achieve the learning outcomes. So, let's move forward on self-check. Based on the activity 1, finding OBE in the classroom, answer the question below. So, dito, magbe-base tayo ng answers based on the table matrix dun sa activity 1, dun sa take action. So, question number 1, what did the teacher intend to accomplish in the lesson at the beginning? Question number 2, what is accomplished or achieved at the end? Has learning occurred? Number 3, what learning outcomes was achieved? And number 4, during the activity, was there an opportunity for all children to learn? Describe. And last, number 5, how was the achieved learning outcomes assessed? And explain. Then, let's go for the self-reflect. As future teacher, reflect on your observation and report in finding OBE in the classroom and complete the sentence. Choose only one to answer. So, we have to choose only one on these two questions. Number 1, I like OBE because in the future when I become a teacher, I should. And number 2, I do not seem like OBE because in the future when I become teacher, I should. So we have to choose one from these two questions. That's all about my report. I hope you learned something. Thank you everyone. Keep safe.